In order to play a card game, one must play cards. And in order to play cards, one must have cards. And that means cards in hand, cards in deck, cards in the state where they can be played. But card games aren't single-player games. You've got an opponent sitting across from you. You want your cards to directly influence their cards. You want cards to interact. And universally, there's one area that interaction is expected. On field or on the board. Once you play your card down, now it's fair game. And your opponent can damage it, banish it, exile it, negate it, return it to your hand, return it to your deck, or send bees to attack it. It's generally accepted that once something hits the board, your opponent is going to try and mess with it. You can't just directly go for your opponent, you have to make it through the cards they put in your way. So if a card hasn't been played yet, hasn't been put on the board, is it safe? Will it be protected from interaction? Generally, no. Interaction isn't limited to the board. You aren't just trying to play your cards, you're also trying to keep your opponent from playing their cards. The genre isn't about two players individually racing towards their win condition, which is why metagames can sometimes be criticized as solitaire. Just because you put a card in your deck doesn't guarantee you'll be able to play it in every game. Even ignoring your opponent's handiwork, you may not draw it, or you may not have enough resources to actually get it out. It's not guaranteed. Does this mean that your cards are at risk everywhere? That no matter where they lay dormant, there's a chance for your opponent to get at them? Not really. Not every card game allows for disruption of this type, and not every deck will choose to run it. And even the ones that do run it won't be able to hit every card in your deck. But your cards are still at risk, and there are many, many ways that your opponent can get rid of your cards before you get the chance to play them onto the board. So let's go through the big games and see how they approach this type of interaction. And just for the sake of this video, I'll commandeer two terms to help make things more simple. Reactive board-based and public interference will be called interaction, and proactive messing with and attacking the hand and other private sectors will be called disruption. In reality, these two mean the same thing. But for the sake of clarity, just pretend they don't for the duration of the video. We'll start on the game with the least disruption and end on the game with the most. Oh, and if you looked at the title in a more literal sense, Dragon Shields for everything. Let's start off with the Pokémon trading card game. This is the game where your hand has the most protection from your opponent. There's plenty of interaction on the board, cards that change the position of your Pokémon, cards that change the properties of attacks, and just so many cards that can discard energy, the main resource of the game. And there are also many cards that cause lingering effects. Can't play items, can't activate abilities, can't retreat. All I'm saying is, lots of board-based interaction is universal, even in a game like Pokémon. But as the Pokémon trading card game is the game with a more your turn, my turn feel, you usually have very few actions to do on your opponent's turn. Disruption is a bit more limited. And because of that, the cards in your hand are generally pretty safe. The most common way to mess with your opponent to disrupt their hand is with a card like N. You take their hand and shuffle it back into their deck. They do get to draw to replace the cards, and the effect is symmetrical. You don't get to tax their hand without the cards in your hand also changing. And this card has been printed many times throughout the years. Judge, Marnie, Roxanne, N, and nowadays Iono. And out of these ones, the ones that aren't entirely symmetrical are comeback tools, designed to favor the player that is behind in the game. If you want to play N or Iono while you're ahead, your opponent may lose their hand, but they will end up with more cards than you. The disruption isn't ever being solely used as disruption, but that's the most common way, so let's get into the less common ways. The previous examples were reshuffling into the deck, and none of them told you to actually discard. The cards may not be in your hand anymore, but with how much draw the game inherently has, you're probably going to see those cards again before the game is over. So there isn't discarding. Until there is. Cards like Ares spend your supporter for the turn just to mess with your opponent's hand. That's the trend with discards in this game. It costs a lot of investment in order to get it off. More on this in other segments. And if you don't need to fulfill a specific additional cost, the card will probably only let you discard specific card types. You won't see cards mess with your energy or your evolutions. And again, these are the uncommon ways of messing with your opponent's hand. Most decks just don't have the room for targeted hand disruption. If you're playing the Pokémon trading card game, you don't have to worry about your cards getting deleted from your hand. But just like in any card game, your deck is another story. I'll bring up Mill here because it is universal. Mill is where your opponent takes the top card of your deck and sends it directly to the discard or graveyard or removes it from existence. This is something that is in every game, it's an entire deck archetype, and something that seems like a powerful source of disruption at first, but is inconsistent. Sure, you are being deprived of your resources before you can even see them, but it's completely random. Neither you nor your opponent have control over what card will be discarded, and because of that, combined with the large deck sizes, milling is utilized more as an alternative win condition rather than a form of disruption. Except maybe in Hearthstone. Your opponent may stall you from playing your cards in the Pokemon trading card game, but they won't stop you outright. They can't prevent you from dropping a card down, so they do what they can, within reason, to slow you down. And if you get slowed at just the right time, they can get past the checkered flag before you get to execute. In a game with a gameplay loop similar to two players running a race against one another, a game that doesn't let you do anything during your opponent's turn, there isn't too much interaction, and there isn't too much disruption either. It exists for sure, but in a game built like this, too much of either would slow the game down to a crawl. This type of game doesn't really facilitate these types of cards well. We're done with that game, so moving on to the next one. The placing of these next two can be debated, it honestly can go either way, but the game I'll be exploring next is Hearthstone. Compared to the previous game, Hearthstone lets you do a bit more to mess with your opponent's hand. Unlike the Pokemon trading card game, you can exert influence on specific cards. There are many cards that can allow you to directly target your opponent's hand. Cards like Dirty Rat, we love Dirty Rat, that forces a minion onto the board. A card like Unseen Saboteur doing the same thing with spells, or a card like Theotar straight up swapping cards with your opponent. But all of these cards come with one important caveat. To an extent, each of these cards are random. For cards like Dirty Rat, you don't get to choose the card that you rip from their hand. Sometimes you take their game-winning combo piece, and sometimes you pull something that loses you the game on the spot. That's the chance you take when you play a Dirty Rat. And in the case of a card like Theotar, you're still not off the hook with the potential randomness. Hearthstone only lets you choose between 3 options, most of the time, and because this card uses the same Discover mechanic, you can only steal from a selection of 3 cards, while their hand can go up to 10, playing into the aspect of chance that runs through all games in the genre. In Hearthstone, you can stop your opponent, it just isn't guaranteed. There are cards similar to Area in the Pokemon trading card game, where specific hate means you can target specific cards, but generally you'll need to play the odds. Hearthstone is designed to be more board-based, which is why it has a lot of interaction, but isn't as heavy on the disruption. And when the game is more focused on the board, you tend to worry more about what's here rather than what's here. There's a reason why most of the disruption cards aren't exactly meant for the early game. Hearthstone's disruption kind of comes out of necessity. As the game became faster, power shifted more to the hand, and disruption needed to be buffed to compensate. Just Dirty Rat wasn't enough. Next up is Yu-Gi-Oh! Yu-Gi-Oh! Has had a history of cards that remove cards from your opponent's hand, but most of the time they don't stick around for too long. Discards are generally symmetrical, and the hand is a pretty safe place to keep your cards. But in Yu-Gi-Oh!, the hand isn't the only place that's really important. The hand isn't the only place where you can play cards from. The graveyard, or GY, is often considered a second hand, because of how many cards have additional effects that generate advantage while in the graveyard. While a very strong argument can be made that the graveyard is more analogous to the board than the hand, it is public information at all times, you can do so much with it that I'm just gonna compare it to the hand for this segment. While your hand is usually free from harm, the graveyard is where all the rest of the targeted disruption goes. Even though the graveyard would seem to be the resting place of your cards after they are spent, cards can still be live once they fall there. So if you really want to get rid of a card, you have to banish it, and there are many, many cards that banish cards from the graveyard. Once your opponent uses a card, you can proactively make sure they don't get full value out of them. Small disclaimer, some cards can still get value when being banished, but if they're banished face down, then the card really gets taken out of the game. But that isn't very common. In Yu-Gi-Oh!, you can't really proactively stop your opponent from playing cards. There are many, many tools to stop your opponent from playing or drawing cards reactively, once they've hit the field. Most hand traps are the example here, but trying to get to their cards before they're played, not as many tools to do that. Which is why stopping the secondary effects and reuse is where the disruption comes in. So your cards are pretty safe until you play them. There is one exception though, Ghost Reaper and Winter Cherries, which allows you to just banish a specific card out of your opponent's extra deck. But in order to get this type of specific proactive targeting, there are restrictions. Reaper can't even be played unless your opponent has more monsters than you, And it also requires you to also be running the card you're trying to disrupt. That means you need to sacrifice extra deck space. Specific targeting has to be symmetrical. With the speed of Yu-Gi-Oh!, interaction is paramount, and because of that, once again, the disruption takes a bit of a secondary role. Almost every turn is nothing but gas, which means you need to spend your resources on either forwarding your win condition or immediately stopping your opponent. Simply put, the game is so fast that proactive disruption is only really useful when it's basically interaction. Your cards need to do something now. Finally, we end off with Magic. And there's a reason it's last. Magic has a lot of emphasis on color identity. Each color of mana have individual strengths. And for the cards of the black color identity, one specific strength is important to the topic of this video. Black is the color that has direct hand disruption. Discard. And the most powerful card with this effect is Thoughtseize. Only 1 mana, and you get to take any non-land card out of any player's hand. It also costs 2 life, but compared to the sacrifices the cards I brought up earlier cost, it is really not a big deal. There is a reason I left this game for last. Right on turn 1, your opponent can look at your hand and have their choice of pickings. Thoughtseize is in higher power level formats, but even in standard there's duress. Same thing, except you can't take creatures. If your deck is built around a sorcery or enchantment or instant, you'd better have some form of interaction to keep them from ripping it out of your hand, even in standard. The existence of these 2 cards alone makes sure that your hand is always in jeopardy. Once a swamp gets dropped, your hand is in peril. And if they're going first, you may not even be able to stop them. But again, these cards can't take lands, so you're at least guaranteed your resources. And hey, if you've got a hand full of lands, all they get is information. Even though the mana cost of these cards is low, the opportunity cost of going down in card advantage without generating any advantage of your own makes it not as oppressive as one would initially think. I personally think that Thoughtseize is a solution that's worse than the problem, but that's purely subjective. But while this topic regarding this game can be summed up with just this one card, there's one more example that I want to bring up. Let's say that you're running 4 copies of a very important card, but the first one gets countered, cleared, whatever. Not great, but at least you know you've still got 3 in your deck that you can draw into. Until your opponent plays Surgical Extraction, goes through your deck and gets rid of all of them. Once a copy of a card hits the grave, the rest in your deck can be targeted. And it doesn't cost mana. The cards in your hand are not safe, and the cards in your deck are not safe. When you play Magic, don't take anything for granted. They can't take your lands, but they can take just about everything else. But in a game where card advantage is harder to come by, you can at least take solace in the fact that they are going 1 for 1. And sometimes you even get a life lead. Magic is at the perfect medium for maximum disruption. The game isn't too slow where disruption would cripple the pacing, and it isn't so fast that you can't afford to play something proactive. The inherent grindiness of the resource system means that card advantage is very important. So much so that proactive disruption can be more important than a reactive answer. Stopping a card in the future can matter more than stopping one now. All card games come with interaction, but not every game is suitable for heavy disruption. We as card game players love interaction. We want there to be interaction, we don't want to sit there and watch our opponents play a single player game. But where does the interaction end? Should it be exclusive to the board, or should it go everywhere? Should these cards be exclusively reactive, or can we introduce more proactive answers? At the end of the day, people just want to play their cards. And it's all about striking a balance between losing completely from hand and triggering grief 3 times on turn 1. It's something that each individual game struggles with their game speed and power level. And all of this is subjective. Disruption and interaction in general is something that just needs to exist once your game reaches a certain power level. We can stop pretending these 2 words mean what I said and go back to using them interchangeably now. The core purpose of interaction is interaction, making sure your cards do something to other cards. And sometimes it'll be in the hand, sometimes on the board, and sometimes somewhere else. Interaction is a response to a game state. Interaction is adaptation. Creatures too efficient, make more removal. Removal not good enough, let combat do the trick. But I think interaction is something we're all happy about. Because if a game is designed with both players in mind, it becomes more enjoyable for everyone. In a genre that already has variance, we should do our best to make sure that there's always something you can do to win. Or at least make it feel like there's something you can do to win.